The Hermitage ranks among the biggest and oldest museums in the world. It boasts nearly 3 million monuments of art and culture, including painting, sculpture, graphic, decorative, and applied art. The Hermitage collection covers the entire history of world culture, ranging from antiquity to our present time, from the primitive culture of the Stone Age and the ancient Oriental civilizations of Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, to European art of the 20th century. The Hermitage is an architectural ensemble of 4 buildings housing over 350 halls. The history of the Hermitage implies also the history of the buildings themselves. Founded in the 18th century as a palace museum for Russian emperors, the buildings of the Hermitage were built near the residence of the Russian Tsars, the Winter Palace, in the following order: the Small Hermitage, the Big or Old Hermitage, the Hermitage Theater, and the New Hermitage.
This molded reliquary is a rarefied example of medieval craftsmanship. The austere monumentalism, which Romanesque art is remarkable for, combines here with the refined spirituality of the facial expression, already foreshadowing the Gothic style. This masterpiece is one of the earliest in the work of Raphael. It was with his sublime images of the Madonna that he became so renowned. Raphael's imagery is faithful and placid, and the clear purity of the dominant mood seems to be emphasized by the tender spring landscape of his native Umbria. The well-balanced composition, clear outlines, and the reasoned color scheme impart an impression of harmonious inner and outer life. The images take on a fine and sublime character. The face of Mary, whose dress and hair are done in the latest Florentine fashion of that time, is imbued with a placid smile. We also smile looking at the child, who is interested in a flower, as if being ordinarily childishly acquainted with the world. The painter found many versatile shades in the interplay of light and half-shadow, searching for well-rounded forms, as well as for luminosity and airiness of pictorial space.
The Italian section of the Hermitage includes works from 7 centuries. In its beginning, there are works from the late 13th, early 14th centuries, which foreshadow the Renaissance. The development of Gothic art in Northern Europe and new processes in the social and cultural life of Italy were parallel trends to a considerable degree. The Italians began sooner than other nations to work out a secular world outlook. Man began to comprehend his particular position in the surrounding world, as well as his personal individuality. Humanism, as a new system of secular world outlook, formulated the concept of man as the crown of the act of creation and affirmed belief in man's infinite potentialities. Not heavenly, but not just earthly, became an image of man in the works of art of the Italian Renaissance. It was an ideal, evolved image, and the source of such inspiration was found in the art of the ancients, while omitting the canons of the Middle Ages. The art of the Italian Renaissance was nevertheless not merely an imitation of that of antiquity. It was endowed with spiritual values, which represented an organic part of the new individual consciousness, thanks to the spiritual experience of the Middle Ages. Ideal forms were now imbued with living human emotions and mobile spirituality. The principles of linear perspective became an active instrument in the new artistic investigation of the surrounding world. The schematic approach to world phenomena yielded to times when the representative conception became dominant in art. The experience of the Barbizon school opened not only the new, actual motifs for landscape painting, but contributed to the evolving of a new pictorial technique by loose brushing. Plein air painting was a starting point of this trend, and soon the moment came in the history of French art when the young artist Claude Monet is said to have repeated, following the Barbizon artists, "I paint what I see," but to have added, "and I paint so how I see." This was the starting point of Impressionism. Monet had no permanent studio, for the sky above and the ground beneath became his actual studio. The Lady in the Garden is his earlier painting of 1867. We can see the moving flowers charged with bright light and the long, mobile shadows. The white dress is painted with blue in the shadows, for it was here the true hue created by the shadow from the orange-yellow umbrella. In the autumn of 1876, Monet lived in the country house of his friend and patron, Dr. Rochide, at Montgeron. From the early morning, one could see him there near the pond and the blooming brushwood, working at one of his huge canvases. He painted quickly in order not to omit all details of the changing lighting. Monet did not draw in the academic sense of this word. Drawing was not the object of his artistic conscience. Monet achieved a scintillating, fresh range of tones when applying them pure in minute touches to the white ground of the canvas. Such canvas seen at a short distance seemed to be a plain surface covered with innumerable and irregular colored patches, but at some distance from the canvas they miraculously turned into mobile image throbbing with life and excitement, with swinging flowers, fleeting ripples, quivering verdure. To represent at one stroke the changing pulsation of life, and to get the immediate connection between the painter's eye perceiving nature's color and the canvas surface bearing his pigment's equivalent, without turning either to any conception of content or to literary subject. It was the new method of working at the painting, as well as the art, which had to render the mentality of the mid-19th century. It was the discovery of Claude Monet, but it was also the outcome of the life of a whole group of men. Alfred Sisley painted his picture in the Hermitage collection, The Town Villeneuve-la-Garenne, in 1872. It displays the living and immense space imbued with light and air. But the impressionist brushwork of the artist created the volumes with solid forms of the tree trunks and houses of the provincial French town. By the last decade of the 19th century, the dominant role of the Impressionist trend was over. In this period of post-impressionism, several great names appeared in France: Cézanne, Van Gogh, Gauguin, that foreshadowed the giddy changes in the art of the near 20th century. Their work was not appreciated for its true worth by their contemporaries. Such a painting as Young Girl at the Piano by Cézanne displays no obvious connections with Impressionist conception, which the artist followed in the late 1860s, except in its exaggerated, non-academical manner and the modern subject. A room in the native house of the artist at Aix-en-Provence, with figures of his mother sitting on a sofa and his sister at the piano. The color palette was dark and heavy, and was distant from the luminous colors of the Impressionists. Even in the circle of his associates, this strange provincial was an outsider, as well as at salons where his paintings were not accepted, being always rejected with great indignation. While working at plein air with Pissarro, at Pontus and Auvers, Cézanne absorbed the Impressionist technique. There he painted his self-portrait, represented as a bearded, shaggy man with a fevered look, whose face was aged prematurely because of inner storms and solitude. The Impressionist technique could not banish the strong originality of Cézanne. He was capable of endowing his canvases with the heat of the southern noon and the freshness of mountain air. His analysis of color and tone, combined with strong, short brush strokes, created not only the interplay of light and shadows sliding along the tree trunk and over the grass and yellow soil. He considered color as a means of modeling, and can perceive the inner force of this tree with its twigs and dense needles, of the soil, mountains, and air of Provence. Cézanne's color is the living substance of all objects. The soft apples, his favorite motif, dense fabrics, and stiff napkins in his still life piece. The living personages display the same powerful material substance as we can see in the strong figure of the peasant, whose brick-red face, burnt with sun, reminds us of the soil, or the old houses in Provence, and whose heavy hands call to mind the matured fruits from the trees cultivated by these hands. Impregnated with the powerful forces of the earth, he is an integral part of nature itself, and this personage needs no proper name, which is why he is only Pipe Smoker, an image of a man as a creation of nature. When seeing the figurine of the Italian Renaissance sculptor in one of the rooms of the Autumn Salon of 1905, the critic Louis Vaucel explained, "Donatello among the fauves," because the paintings of young artists which were hung in this room were all painted with violently bright colors, absolutely free from any standards. From that moment, those artists were called the fauves, or wild beasts. Experimenting with pigments and following thus the traditional formal bent of the French art, the fauve made important discoveries in the sphere of color, which was one of the starting points of modern painting. The fauve as an artistic trend, the first one in the history of modern art, had a short life, but it gave an impetus for such great artists of the 20th century as Henri Matisse, as well as for other important artists, Derain, Vlamingh, Marquet, Van Dongen. In Vlaminck's work View of the Seine, an ordinary landscape motif was transformed into a really severe image, imbued with dramatic force and passion. The bohemian atmosphere of the artistic Montmartre determined forever the extremely bold and spectacular brushing characteristic of Kees van Dongen. In his painting, Lady in the Black Hat, we see the image of the free and proud, dangerous if not fatal woman. Pictorial space of the huge canvas seems to be tensed, so actively the green pushes the blue to the upper border. Against the green, The red-pink bodies are represented as if they are set against the blue. Elastic as tensed springs, they are charged with force and fire, strengthened by the green background. The main objects of this painting are the colors themselves. The painting Music by Henri Matisse was a strikingly simple and at the same time magnificent and visually convincing expression of the idea revealing the act of artistic endeavor. It was also a great wall decoration, and it marked the beginning of a period of monumental painting, which was restored to life by Matisse, who used the means of modern art. Matisse painted the picture Music for a renowned collector from Moscow. Sergei Ivanovich Shukin initiated a number of motifs in the work of Matisse. Once he proposed to portray the artist's family, with Madame Matisse and their 3 children. So the family portrait appeared, and the commissioner, endowed with rare taste, appraised it very highly. In this work, the portrayed reality was subordinated to an elegant artistic arrangement of form and joyful color patterns, penetrated with the purely musical rhythm and inner spirituality so characteristic of Matisse's work. The early work Two Sisters by Pablo Picasso is imbued with a gloomy, emotional aura. The only tone, the cool blue laid on the canvas very densely, dominates in the painting as if to express the state of cold disappointment and somber despair. The ascetic figures, confined in their rigid outlines, are built up of this persistently monochrome color material. These women are tragically desolate, but they maintain their Spanish pride and demeanor. The composition in the painting by André Derain, Harbor in Provence of 1913, is built of geometrical forms. Here we can see the clear, simple, and severe beauty, based on the logical compositional order when expressing the creative unity of nature and a man. Two-dimensional color planes converging inside are the main elements in the monumental and tense construction of the figure in the painting of 1908, Lady with a Fan by Picasso, revealing his first steps toward Cubist conception. In his attempt to find a new method which allowed him to reveal the inner construction of things and the phenomena within pictorial forms, Picasso was much influenced by the exaggerated rough forms characteristic of Negro art and ancient Iberian sculpture. It was the starting point of Cubism, a new artistic trend which was initiated by Picasso and Braque, and then developed also by their friends, Gris, Delaunay, and Derain, who departed from the Fauve.
The crucifixion scheme and the figurative forms themselves followed in the 13th century the canons of Byzantine art. The Italian painter nevertheless left his signature on the panel. The Hermitage piece is thus the only actually identified work of this master. This image of woman's beauty, which is free and dangerous, if not demonic, reminds us of the free artistic atmosphere of Montmartre. Van Dongen's painting, which seems so audacious and unrestrained, could be inspired by any real person he met in the artistic circles of that time. The character of the surface and Cezanne's brushwork itself gives the impression of powerful creative forces boiling in nature and in human activity. This energy emerges in the forms of this still life, in evidently tense relations between juicy fruits, the earthenware jug with its clear brilliance, and the sumptuous fabric with its low voice. subject taken from the Old Testament was treated as a genre scene. We can see Jacob, a younger son, who thanks his mother, Rebekah, who deceived his blind father in order to receive his blessing. The landscape surrounding this scene is remarkable in its beauty. Jan Bruegel, in his painting, depicted actual features of the Flemish countryside in a highly detailed style distinguished with great subtlety. This painter was an outstanding master of so-called cabinet painting, which became popular with the educated classes in Europe by the early 17th century. The term cabinet referred to private collections that included, as a rule, not only various curiosities, but also any small-scale pictures. With all his work, Caravaggio affirmed the superiority of realistic rather than idealistic pictorial context. Nevertheless, his paintings are not two copies of nature. Looking at the objects near the youth, the contemporaries of Caravaggio could easily comprehend such a representation as an allegory of love. But the faithfully observed still life could be understood as an allegory of the five senses. There were also other interpretations. The face of the musician does not distinguish itself with the canons of classical proportions. It even has some female features. As a result, in the Russian title of the painting, this image was identified earlier as a woman. The landscape was a favorite background in the English portraiture of the Age of Enlightenment. Here the landscape, rendered by the artist as a live aerial environment penetrated with light, is a bearer of the palpitating emotional atmosphere.
The status of beauties acquired particular features in 18th century England. They were an adornment of court society, but besides this, they are educated in literature and the arts, and could successfully play the part of the salon hostess. But first of all, they displayed devotion to their maternal duties. In English portraiture, mothers were represented together with their children, as a rule, playing in the parks of the family estates, enjoying the pleasures of nature. The great poetic charm of the English women's images determined their human value. Thomas Gainsborough addressed his portraits to the emotional perception of the viewers. His Lady Dressed in Blue is endowed with an unrestrained grace that was understood by the people of that time as a sign of a good soul. This portrait impresses with the spiritual beauty of the subject. The subtle harmony of the cold tones Gainsborough preferred to use, blue, light blue, silver, strengthened the poetic component of this image. The spontaneous technique evolved by this painter was understood by his contemporaries as unfinished work. But so long as Gainsborough always took into consideration the general impression, so this unfinished manner created a striking likeness, noted Reynolds. In The Portrait of Eleanor Betton, from the hand of Henry Raeburn, Raeburn, close friend of Walter Scott, was born in Scotland. In his works, one can feel the romantic mood. The theme of the unification of man with nature became the central theme of the Romantic movement. The attention the painter showed toward the problems of aerial perspective also foreshadowed the pictorial interests of the 19th century. Landscape became a bearer of emotions. It turned into a living aerial environment, penetrated with light.
Brown, Charles. England. Intaglio, Mars and Bellona. About 1785. Carnelian, 36 by 30 centimeters. Entered the Hermitage in 1787. The brothers Brown were very skillful in stone carving, in convex, cameo, and in deepened, intaglio. They used ancient as well as contemporary subject matters. Their intaglios were particularly brilliantly executed. The Browns carved carnelian of different shades, which often created the extended and complicated spaciousness of the compositions. The inscriptions and the reliefs themselves are a mirror reflection, for the positive forms appear through the impression. Carving in two-layered sardonyx allowed the sumptuous collar to be handled virtuously, as appropriate to royal clothing. One can recognize a pearl necklace, which became fashionable at that time. The whole appearance of the facial expression also reveals that we are dealing here with a ruler, a queen, which the sign of the most noble order of the Garter, St. George's, also confirms. A rare example of a painting of a real historical event, Sacco di Roma, when Rome was captured by the troops of Emperor Karl V in 1527, is confirmed by the inscription on the reverse, "The dissolute Rome having been cut in two by the pious Karl V." It concerns certainly the habits of the papal court rather than the city of Rome. Noisy orgies like those of the Romans of the decadent age brought notoriety to the papal Rome of that time. The dish, The Abduction of Helen, was executed in Castel Durante for the Duke and Duchess of Mantua, Francesco Gonzaga and Isabella d'Este. In the center we can see the arms of this noble family, as well as a motto, "No hope, no fear." The painting of this dish was made after engravings by Marco Dante and Marcantonio Raimondi. These engravers worked from Raphael's creations on the same subject. All the figures and the deepened space were handled very skillfully. This faithful documentary painting has an additional metaphorical sense. An unknown gentleman who was ready to fall down on slippery St. James Street, a street of fashionable clubs, has lost his reputation. In the window of Humphrey's shop, he was a famous publisher and engraving seller, there are caricatures of Gilray. There are also spectators near the shop window, from a street boy to the dandy connoisseur. The crucifixion scheme and the figurative forms themselves followed in the 13th century the canons of Byzantine art. The Italian painter nevertheless left his signature on the panel. The Hermitage piece is thus the only actually identified work of this master. The figure of Mary, which stands out graciously against the golden background, is framed by the stamped tracery border, which recalls manuscript illumination in the Gothic style. But Simone's painting is penetrated with a more punctuated and deep lyricism, unusual in medieval art. It is no accident that Simone was a friend of Petrarch and his favorite painter.